Happy Monday. Thank you for joining me for this week's Weekly Wisdom. Now, in honor of African American History Month and as a continuation of our message last week about how are we having difficult conversations, specifically around race, we're going to continue that and turn it into a series. So this week, we're going to be focusing on how do we identify things that we need to unlearn, right? No matter who you are, there have been situations that you have grown up with, ways that your brain has experienced the world around you that you need to unlearn, right? Not everything, but there are some things. Now, if we think about the way that the brain works, just hang with me for the geeky part of it. I promise we won't stay here long. But if we think about the way the brain works, we are breaking down hundreds of thousands of pieces of data every single day. And so our brain does it like this. It's happening in the background to where we don't even realize it. And if I go through and I have an interaction with somebody and it's a really bad interaction, then my brain is going to say people that look like this person, sound like this person, act like this person are bad. And again, it's going to happen subconsciously. It's not intentional. That's why sometimes we walk up to somebody and we may not like them, but we don't know why, right? That is the filing system that's happening in our brain. Now, this happens in other areas, and at the deepest point of it happening is when we are kids. So I'll give you an example, right? When I was a kid, we could not leave the table until we had finished everything that was on our plate. And we couldn't have dessert until we had finished everything that was on our plate, right? Throwback, my parents had learned it from their parents. Think about the Depression, like we can see how it got to that point. But it also caused, and many kids in my generation are experiencing this, it also caused overeating because the adults were dipping the plate for adult portions. And so we would eat beyond where we were full, and then we would eat even more because we wanted dessert. So it caused bad habits around portion control and being able to identify when our body was full, right? So this is an example of something that I've had to focus on to work on unlearning and trying not to pass it to my daughter. We have other areas, right? When we think about race, we have areas that we've been taught. If you think about resumes and people getting interviews, European name, right? A European name is going to have a much stronger chance of getting an interview than an ethnic name. So you think Susan versus Shaquita. Susan is going to have a much stronger chance of getting a resume than Shaquita. And again, a lot of times people aren't making these decisions because they're like, oh, I just don't like it. It's happening underneath the level. It's a subconscious decision. And so if you are a leader, if you are impacting somebody's career, somebody's life, don't you want to know what areas maybe you need to unlearn? What areas are showing up that you don't want to show up that way? So Maya Angelou states that when we know better, we do better. And we have learned so much over the past couple of decades. We have grown faster than we could have ever imagined. There's so much information out there about how to make sure that we're leaning in to diversity, equity, and inclusion, why it's important, how we want to do better. But a lot of times our own fears will get in the way. Our own guilt will get in the way. Our own thoughts about who we are and are not. An example of that is my father's Puerto Rican and my mom's white. We grew up in Louisiana, teeny tiny town in Louisiana, and this union wasn't looked upon well, right? Interracial relationships were frowned upon in a very big way where I grew up. And when I got in my 20s, I had this thought that I can't be racist because I understand what it's like to be discriminated against. When I tell y'all, that was so far from the truth. But that's how I was leaning into my world. And it wasn't until I made my first really big misstep that I understood just how wrong that was, right? Many times we'll think, I can't be racist, I have black friends. I can't be racist, I'm dating a person of a different race. I can't be racist because. And the answer is yes, you can. And it's not intentional. It's not because you're a hateful person. It's not because you're a bad person. When you look at how this country was founded, it was founded on basic concepts. White people are better than everybody else. The systems were created around it, the processes, the laws, all of these things. And so we are focusing on unlearning that. And again, if you are a leader and you are impacting people's careers and lives, it is critical that you unlearn these areas. What are these unconscious biases that you may have? There is nothing wrong with working through uncovering these and understanding that you're going to feel a certain way as you're going through this journey. And that's okay too. You will get on the other side. When I was going through and I was really struggling with this and I was feeling massive amounts of guilt and shame and all of these pieces, I was working with a coach trying to get on the other side. And she asked where all of this was coming from. And I said, I don't like my thoughts. I don't like that thought that happens that I know better. And she says, okay, scratch the first thought. What's the second thought? And I gave her an example where the first thought was a thought that I didn't want. And the second thought was the thought that I now knew to be truth, who I wanted to show up as and the world that I believed in. And she says, the first thought is what you have been taught. The second thought is who you are. Lean into the second thought. The first thought is just background noise. So as you're going through this journey, if it's uncomfortable, it's supposed to be, right? I recently saw a TikTok that said our discomfort through this training is nothing compared to think about like the 15-year-old African-American kids, children who had to walk through crowds of booing and violent people to just try and get into school when schools were unsegregated. Our discomfort in learning how we want to show up is nothing compared to that. So who do you want to be? How do you want to show up? And how are you going to get there? And I know this isn't an easy topic. Next week, we're going to talk about giving ourselves room and grace to change and grow, and why that's not always as easy as we think that it is. If you want to continue the conversation, if you're on your journey and you've hit a wall and you're like, I don't know what to do, reach out. This is something that the conversations need to be had. Reach out, ask the questions, as long as it comes from true curiosity and pure intent, meaning you really want to know and you're struggling with trying to figure it out. You could ask me anything that you want. We'll figure it out together. Thank you for joining me for this week's Weekly Wisdom. And don't forget, as always, you got this. I'll see you next week.